Welcome back to the AR-15 barrel series. Today, we have a pretty special barrel. It's a Krieger blank that was finished by Ross Precision Machine Rifle Works. This barrel was sent in by a very generous subscriber, so I would like to thank him very much for making this video possible. We'll start by going over the specs, then take a closer look at things on the bench. After that, we will head to the range and lay down some groups. Since this is a custom barrel, the specs are pretty much up to the end user, but in this case, the barrel is 16 inches, made from 416R stainless steel, with 4-groove rifling, 1-7 twist, a custom chamber optimized for 77 grain sear MatchKings, intermediate length gas, 5/8 by 24 threads, and a straight .750 inch profile. The barrel also has dual gas block set screw dimples, and the gas port is chamfered, which is a nice detail that I appreciate. Moving on to the inspection, we'll start with the weight. The barrel weighs in at just over 2 pounds, and if we divide that by 16 inches to get the pounds per inch of barrel length, we can see that it's pretty close to the middle, making this about a mid-weight barrel. Next, we'll move on to some gauging, starting with the throat erosion gauge. And the barrel is measuring at less than a 1 on this gauge, which is pretty tight. Next is the headspace, which I'll check using a new stripped JP bolt and Forster headspace gauges, starting with a minimum headspace gauge. And the bolt spins, meaning that the barrel has at least minimum headspace, which is important for ammunition compatibility. We'll move on to a minimum plus 0.003 headspace gauge. And the bolt does not spin, which means that the headspace is less than 0.003 above the minimum, which is just fine. The gas port measured 0.083 inches, and the only other 16-inch barrel with intermediate gas that I've measured so far is the Roscoe K9, and this barrel felt quite a bit softer than the Roscoe. Moving on to the gas block journal, here is the diameter, and this makes the clearance between the gas block journal and the gas block about average to slightly less than average, which will allow for easy installation of the gas block and should also allow for a sufficient gas seal. The barrel extension diameter was larger than average, which will make for a tight clearance with the upper receiver with very little wobble. Next, I'll use my Teslong Borescope to take a peek at the inside of the barrel, starting with the body of the chamber. And everything looks excellent. This looks to be a very nice finish without any issues. This is the neck of the chamber. We'll take a quick spin around here. And again, everything looks great. Here is the throat. There are a few things to look at here. The reamer left a decent amount of smearing on the right side of the rifling lands. In my experience, this doesn't seem to have a huge impact on the performance of the barrel, and it usually smooths out pretty well after firing a few rounds. But it definitely doesn't look too good through the Borescope. Here's another look at the throat after break-in, and it looks like most of the smearing and burrs are gone, and things have smoothed out. Moving on, here's a look at the rifling, and this looks flawless. Again, this has 4-groove rifling with a 1-7 twist. Here is the gas port. It has an internal chamfer, which is pretty rare to see. I believe that the Daniel Defense barrels that I had, and maybe one or two more, also had internal chamfers, but it's not something that I get to see too often. Also, the gas port is within the groove and misses the rifling lands, which again is nice attention to detail. And last, here is a spin around the crown. Again, this looks excellent. The leading edge of the crown looks to be very clean, without any roughness or any other issues that I can see. Next up, we'll go over the barrel break-in. Typically for new barrels, I follow whatever break-in procedure the manufacturer recommends, and if the manufacturer does not have a clearly stated break-in procedure that I can find, then I don't bother doing one. For this barrel, Krieger does have a recommended break-in procedure, as well as an article with some background information. But anyway, I did follow the break-in procedure prior to shooting the groups with this barrel. And with that, we will go over the shooting setup and then head to the range. The barrel was mounted in an upper receiver from Bad Attitude Department with a Psionics bolt carrier group and a BCM MCMR handguard. The receiver threads were greased, and the barrel nut was torqued to the manufacturer's specifications. To increase rifle stability, the handguard was fitted with a 3-inch front bag rider, and the stock was supported by a rear bag. The SBR lower uses an A5 buffer system with an A5-2 buffer and Sprinco green spring. No muzzle device was used to prevent possible interference. The trigger was provided by AR Gold. Scope is 7-35 by 56 that was provided by D&T Optics. The scope is mounted in a Reptilia mount that was provided by Dangerous Space LLC. A Garmin Zero C1 Pro chronograph was used to collect velocity data. A Mantis X10 Elite and a Shooter's Global SG Pulse were mounted to the rifle to keep track of rifle stability and detect any possible shooter-induced flyers. Groups were measured using the Ballistic-X app. Each group is 30 shots, fired consecutively over about 4 minutes. This simulates a match or other practical type scenario where the barrel will get some heat into it, and also gives us a decent sample size to work with. Between each group, I used a chamber chiller and leaf blower for cooldown. Distance was 100 yards. Wind was monitored with a ribbon. Point of aim was a small circle at the bottom of the target. Point of impact was set a few inches higher to preserve the aiming point. I'll be shooting 4 groups with this barrel. First will be 2 groups with the IMI Razor Core 77 grain. After that is Federal Gold Medal 77 grain Sear MatchKings. And last is Winchester 55 grain M193. Alright, to start things off, we have IMI Razor Core 77 grain. The reason why I have 2 groups with this is because I shot the first group back in June, and since I live in Arizona, it gets pretty hot, and with the cameras sitting in the direct sunlight, they sometimes overheat. Group 1 ended up being really good, so instead of just asking you guys to take my word for it, I figured I might as well just reshoot it and get everything on camera. So that's what I did. Anyway, shooting went good on my end, meaning that I don't think that it pulled any of the shots. Recoil and bolt velocity felt good. The intermediate gas length with this port size seems to be very effective. Wind was calm for both groups. The Garmin captured velocities for all the shots. So we will finish up and then take a closer look. Before breaking down the group, I just have to touch on something real quick. Shot 26 on group 1 had a failure to ignite, meaning that the primer didn't go off, and I had to manually cycle the round. The firing pin strike looked pretty good to me, but anyway, I finished the rest of the mag, then loaded that round back into the magazine, lined up the shot, and it functioned just fine. I'm not sure exactly where that shot ended up, since the target camera overheated, but I think it went with the rest of the group. Getting back to the numbers, here's a look at all my velocity data for IMI Razor Core, which is sorted by barrel length. This chart has the barrel specs, the round count on each barrel at the time of the group, ambient temperature, ammo lot numbers, and the velocity metrics. And here's a graph with the average muzzle velocities for just 16-inch barrels. For both groups with the Krieger, I shot the same lot of IMI Razor Core and ended up with a pretty big difference. The first group had an average muzzle velocity of 2,726 feet per second, and the second group had an average of 2644, which makes for about an 80 foot per second difference. There was a 35-degree difference in the ambient temperature, which is a decent temperature swing, but not a ton, and I do try to keep the magazines out of the direct sunlight until I am ready to shoot. IMI Razor Core does seem to be a bit temperature sensitive, but I'm not sure it's that sensitive. Anyway, you can let me know your thoughts in the comments. Here's a graph with all the muzzle velocity SDs from 16-inch barrels that I've recorded from Razor Core, and the first group had an SD of 21 feet per second, which is about average, and the second group had an SD of 15 feet per second, which is the best that I've seen from any 16-inch barrel with this load. Moving on to the individual shot data, just a quick reminder that the shot numbers on the target for Group 1 are not correct since I couldn't track them because the camera overheated. But for Group 1, shot 19 was the slowest, at 36 feet per second slower than average, and shot 30 was the fastest, at 61 feet per second faster than average. For Group 2, nothing looked out of place for the velocities. Both groups had an average rifle stability score of 99.7, with the least stable shot being 99.3 and 99.4, which means that I shot both groups about as equally as I could, and I don't think I negatively affected any of the shots to a significant degree. Looking at the groups, Group 1 had a nice center cluster, but a few shots wandered away from the rest of the group. Group 2 again had a nice cluster in the middle, with a few shots that ended up a bit higher. Before going over the group numbers, I'll briefly explain my A-ZED score, which is how I like to evaluate groups. A-ZED stands for A-Zone Equivalence Distance, and it basically gives you the maximum distance where the corrected group size would still fit into a USPSA A-Zone. I like to use this score because it makes it easier for me to understand the practical implications of the group. If you want to know more about it, feel free to pause and read the PowerPoint slides. Getting back to the numbers, Group 1 had a 30-shot group size of 1.799 MOA, with a 30-shot mean radius of 0.399 MOA, which gives us an A-ZED score of 354 yards. Group 2 had a 30-shot group size of 1.615 MOA, with a 30-shot mean radius of 0.430 MOA, which gives us an A-ZED score of 328 yards. For Group 1, don't take the mean radius and A-ZED scores too seriously. Since the target camera didn't record all the shots, I had to guess where a decent amount of those shots landed. So the mean radius and A-ZED scores are going to be a bit off. But this is my best guess, and both of the groups ended up with pretty similar mean radius and A-ZED numbers anyway. So just take a breath, it'll be okay. For group 2, if we take the 30-shot group and break it down into 3 10-shot groups, the average 10-shot group size was 1.3 MOI. And here's my leaderboard chart so that we can see how the Krieger stacks up against all the other barrels I've shot with this ammo. This chart includes the barrel specs, round counts, lot numbers, and group metrics. I do my best to keep things as even as I can between the groups, but keep in mind that not everything is perfectly consistent. But I'm doing the best I can with what I have. Anyway, here's a graph, which makes things a little bit easier to look at, and the Krieger is in first place with a commanding lead over the Centurion Cold Hammer Forge Chromeline midweight barrel in second place. And just a quick note, I only put the second group from the Krieger on the leaderboard, since I had to make quite a few guesses on the shot placement with the first group because the camera failed. But it doesn't really matter, because the Krieger is still in first place by a lot. So, we are off to a good start, and next up, we'll see how it does with the Federal Gold Medal. Quick pause before we get to the next group. If you enjoy the content and find the information useful, I'd really appreciate it if you could tip the channel with a $2 super thanks. By contributing to the channel, you'll help me buy more ammo and equipment, to do more testing and put out more videos. Thanks for watching, let's get back to it. Alright, we got Federal Gold Medal 77 grain Series MatchKings. This has been my go-to premium grade ammo for a while, so I have a decent data set to compare to. It usually groups quite a bit better than the IMI, but the velocity is a decent amount slower. Shooting went good with this group, recoil and bolt velocity felt good, wind was calm, ejection was nice and consistent around 4 o'clock. I forgot to turn on the chrono for the first 6 shots, so I apologize for that, but otherwise everything went fine. So we will finish up and then take a closer look. Alright, here's a look at all of my velocity data for Federal Gold Medal 77 grain. And here's a graph with just the velocities from 16-inch barrels. The Krieger had an average muzzle velocity of 2,573 feet per second, which is quite fast for this load. The Roscoe K9 and the Proof Research barrel shot the same lot of ammo as the Krieger, so this barrel appears to be pretty quick. Velocity standard deviation out of the Krieger was a little higher than average at 28 feet per second. Looking at the individual numbers, shots 7 and 8 were particularly slow at 60 and 68 feet per second slower than average, but the rifle stability looked fine with an average of 99.7. Looking at the groups, it has a nice central cluster, but a few shots escaped and wandered off to the left. As you watch the group develop, you can see that the group mostly starts out on the left and then migrates over to the right. So that could have been me, I suppose, but pretty interesting to look at. 30-shot group size was 1.610 MOA, with a mean radius of 0.411 MOA, which gives us an A-ZED score of 343 yards. 10-shot group size was very consistent, with 2 10-shot groups at 1.0 MOA, and the last 10-shot group was 0.9 MOA. Here is my leaderboard chart for Federal Gold Medal 77 grain SMKs. Keep in mind that this is all done with a limited sample size, so any individual barrel may do better or worse than what you see here. Also, different barrels may prefer different types of ammo. Anyway, the Krieger comes in 6th place out of 30 groups with the Federal Gold Medal. So, another solid group for the Krieger. Next, we are going to switch gears a bit and see how this barrel does with some cheap ammo. Alright, we saved the crowd favorite for last, Winchester M193. I would assume that people who are lucky enough to have Krieger barrels probably don't shoot a whole lot of M193 through them, but this should make for an interesting comparison with the IMI and Federal to see how much of a difference ammo can make. Anyway, shooting went fine with this group, wind was pretty minimal, ejection looked good at 3:30 or 4 o'clock, the Garmin recorded velocities from each shot, and the Mantis only missed 1 shot. So, we will finish up the group and then take a closer look. Here is all my velocity data for Winchester M193, and here's a graph of all the average muzzle velocities for 16-inch barrels. The average velocity out of the Krieger was really high at 3,247 feet per second. Again, I did shoot this barrel on a hotter day, but I'm guessing that the high velocity had more to do with the custom throat dimensions. Anyway, moving on, here's a graph with all the velocity standard deviations that I've had with M193, and the Krieger is slightly lower than average, with a velocity SD of 26 feet per second. Looking at the individual data, nothing looks to be out of place with the velocities, and rifle stability looked fine with an average of 99.7. Looking at the group, shot 19 is kind of lonely up there on the top right, but other than that, the group looks to be pretty tame for Winchester. A 30-shot group size was 3.977 MOA, with a 30-shot mean radius of 1.053 MOA, which gives us an A-ZED score of 134 yards. Average 10-shot group size was 3.2 MOA. Here is the leaderboard chart for Winchester M193. Keep in mind that I am not a perfect shooter, and that all these groups could probably be at least a little bit better, but I'm doing the best that I can. The Krieger ended up in 7th place out of 28 groups with this ammo. So not the best group, but it survived, which is about the best that you can hope for with Winchester M193. Thanks again to the subscriber that sent this out. This was a fun barrel to work with. You'll be seeing more of this barrel on the channel. I have it in an upcoming ammo review, and I'd also like to shoot some Hornady 73 grain ALDs through it at some point. So be on the lookout for that. Also comment below with any other type of ammo you'd like to see me shoot through this barrel. If you could like, comment, and subscribe to help me grow the channel, I'd really appreciate it. I also have a link to my Patreon in the description if you're interested in offering further support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Later.